Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing with Grandma. In our last lesson, we did a study of this leopard in graphite, and then we began drawing a little fox. And that fox is the one that we're going to continue working on today. I first established his head shape and then placed the eyes and the ears as the first steps because that just helps me so much. Today we are going to continue building the drawing. I mentioned in the last video that watercolor artists often don't like their pencil marks to show, and artists can find the technique that they like or the approach that they like with certain mediums. But when I do watercolor, I love to have the developed drawing as part of the study itself, and so I want to take this pencil drawing a little further before I start the watercolor washes. I like the pencil marks to show through. It adds texture and it just helps me to get more accurate emphasis on some of those features, expressions, and textures and all those things. So I'm going to be developing this drawing for the first part of the lesson. He's got really beautiful white forms around his face, but I'm going to focus on drawing in the dark brown areas and trying to get the feel of that fluffiness around the frame of his face. There's a lot of emphasis on those eyes. He has a very relaxed and calm expression, which I love when we can capture animals that way. And so this photograph that I found just on the internet that is free to use for us will make a great study for a little watercolor wash painting. But if you're following along in your sketchbook, go ahead and begin to sketch him out, and then you can pause and follow the steps for the painting process that I'm going to do today. He has this really dark patch down the front of his body, and then he's very fluffy right under his chin. The way that his colors are framed, they kind of make a little mask shape right under his eyes and above his eyes, and I want to capture that unique form of the colors. I hope I can capture it in watercolor as well because it's such a beautiful portrayal of this animal. As always, I like to add texture and emphasis on line variation to create just some emphasis on the hairs, the direction of the hairs, the dark and lightness. And you can see that I'm pushing down on my pencil when I want really dark forms, and I'm using the side of the pencil, and then I can gradually lift it as I'm working for when I approach lighter areas. So practice doing that. It's a really helpful tool instead of erasing a lot of things all the time, but trying to study your subject and then controlling the pressure of your pencil is one of the best tips that I could offer you. It takes practice, but I know you can do it. And then I can lightly stroke in some light areas and have them slowly blend into the other stronger, darker values. So I'm going to start the color work pretty soon, and so I'm going to get my watercolors set up. And first I want to emphasize those really dark areas, and hopefully I can capture that with paint as well. So here we go with the watercolor. I hope you'll join me. The first thing I want to do with my watercolor wash is to block in kind of a golden brown where there is color throughout him. There's a lot of white patches, as I mentioned, on him, so I want to be careful not to get paint into those areas. With watercolor, you don't add white necessarily. You can, they have it, but it's better to use the transparency of watercolor to create the lighter values, and to wherever you want light and white left, you will just leave it untouched and let the paper show through. So the quality of the paper, the whiteness of the paper, is a really important element when you're doing watercolor studies. I'm going to go ahead and block in the brown areas as I mentioned, and then let that soak in a little bit and stain the paper. And then I will add the next layer so that it can blend right into that brown. I'm adding a little bit of golden brown now, and it's a little strong, but it will diminish as I work and do more layers. So it's okay to lay in a little bit of a stronger color, and then you can scrub it out if you don't like it with water, but I'm going to leave that golden brown on top, even though it's a little bit yellow, because I know when I start adding the rich reddish brown for this fox, it's going to work. So here we go. I love the pencil marks showing through. If you don't like the pencil marks showing through, then you might want to just sketch your animal and then do all the darks and the value changes with color, which I do with oil paint. But with watercolor, I just love to see the pencil marks. So now I'm working on the very dark areas, which are the inside of the ears, the tips of the ears. There's a really dark frame around those. There's some dark patches, and I'm going to start working in some of the darker browns on that forehead, as I mentioned. There's a little bit of a framing around his nose and eyes that I want to be careful to not overemphasize, but I also want that rich color to shine through. I can also develop some of the hair strokes, and then the eyes. The eyes, of course, have brown eyeballs, but then the pupil is black, but I want to leave that glimmer of light, so I have to be very careful with my small brush to control those color changes. He's got a very light, faint nose top, and then of course the tip is black and gray on top, so I need to be careful. I'm going to work on some hair marks and let those colors bleed together a little bit. So here I go with the nose. It's very black, but of course the light's going to hit the top, and so I want that to be gray or a little bit lighter black, which would be gray. And then try to get the form, the center there, and the cute little smile. And his chin is very small compared to some of the cats we've been painting recently. And there's a lot of shadow under his chin, which helps to have that nose stand out. So I want to be careful with that as well. So I like using medium and small brushes for watercolor, so don't be afraid to use a big brush though. I use the big brushes for the washes, and then I gradually go to a smaller brush because it's fun to fade one layer into the other layer, and that helps when you apply a little bit of water with a little bit of color in. So let me touch up these ears, try to work in the fur so it looks a little bit more natural. And there is some white paper showing, but I kind of want to cover it with a really faint color and only leave the really white areas for where the light is the lightest. So it just takes time. It's a fun process, and it's really important to study your subject. And this little fox is just fun to paint, and I hope you will enjoy studying him and painting him, even if you leave him as a drawing. I liked my drawing. It was just, I felt that I just wanted to give him a little bit of color today. So I can enrich the brown as much as I want. He's kind of a reddish brown fox. And then I can work on the individual hairs and emphasizing areas that are more important than others. Of course, I want the focal point to be those eyes, so I'm going to make the color a little bit richer in that central part of the head and have more attention on that area. And this color is accurate for him, but I want to leave the outer part of him a little faded so that the emphasis will be on his eyes and that cute little snout. It is a little strong right now, the colors, but I'm going to be working and bleeding them together as I develop the hairs, and they will fade and work together a little bit as we go. Looks like he has pretty little eyelashes, but we'll work them out. Okay, we are getting him worked out, and I'm going to just make sure that I have the color well blended and that every area that has any kind of reddish brown is touched, even if it's lighter than the center. I want to leave some of the white areas pure, but a lot of the white areas are actually kind of a gray blue. So I'm going to work in a little blue in my shadows and re-emphasize those dark shapes. And it helps him to stand out, to see how his chin just stood out a little bit when I laid that dark patch in there. So this one was fun to do. I think we're finishing him up. He's made a really fun little watercolor sketch, and I hope that you will give him a try and just watch this video again and try to study this unique little animal. Okay, I'm gonna touch up a little bit and then add just a soft background. And do you see how when I lay in this soft background, that edge of the fur shows up where I left it pure white? And that just really helps him to have a complete form where the lightest part of that fur is going to show up. So I want to do that on the top of the head a little bit too. I'm just washing in a nice rich sap green. It has a little bit of brown in it so that it works with the fox himself. And it just gives a little bit of atmosphere and context to the subject. Not too much, but just a little wash. Remember to keep this a study and not to worry about perfection or too much detail, but just letting him be a fun project for you to work on. Thank you for studying with me today, and I appreciate your visit to A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing with Grandma.